Hi, Samra. So good to
Hello.
see and so good to hear you. Um, so I invite Samra here. She is a men's coach and women's sexuality coach. And Samra, you will tell us more about men's sexuality and how men can also tap into much more pleasure uh, in their sex lives. So I'm
Yeah.
curious what you have to tell us, please.
Hi, hello. Thank you for having me. So it's so exciting to talk to you today. Yeah, I wanted to share some insights about what it means to be a more sexually conscious man, meaning what it means to be more deep into your sexual expression as a man. So I think for men, as for women as well, it starts with eliminating all of the kind of wrong images or wrong messages that we got around sexuality and sex that actually prevent us from being our full, authentic sexual selves. And
Mm,
this is true for women as it is for men as well.
yeah.
So I think one of the first misconceptions around men's sexuality is this notion that somehow men's sexuality is very simple and straightforward because of the physiognomy of their sexuality, because men have very visible erections and
Mm,
have a very visible turn on compared to women where our turn ons aren't so physically visible. There's this kind of idea that men can be turned on very quickly, that it's just around their erection, and that there's no complexity around their sexuality and their sexual feelings. And actually,
yeah.
it's quite the opposite. It's not the case at all. They actually have even just as deep and complex
Mm,
sexual emotions as women do.
mm,
Um, and I think a lot of that also comes from this idea that somehow pornography depicts men's sexuality in a very particular way, where you have these actors that always have these very hard erections for a very long period of time. And for men, actually, when they're very young, as teenagers and young men, this is often the case where they actually do have
mm,
often erections, and erections that can last longer. Men's sexuality, as with women, changes as they grow older. So
mm,
obviously, they can't get it erect as fast as they could. The erection sometimes can't last as long as they can. And for some men, they see this as somehow that they're becoming less of a man, or that they have issues with their sexuality. But that's
mm,
actually just a normal cycle of men's sexuality, just like we as women have these normal cycles of how our sexuality manifests itself.
mm,
And I think for men, that's actually an opportunity to explore new ways of expressing themselves and looking for new ways of pleasure.
mm,
So it shouldn't be seen as something being wrong with them. Of course, if they have persistent kind of issues around erection and sexuality, they have to address that, whether it's a medical cause or something else. But I think it also opens the door for them to explore other ways in which they can experience pleasure for
mm,
themselves and for
mm.
women.
Yeah.
And I think the third, most damaging kind of misconception that exists for women, but for men in particular, is that sex is only around penetration and ejaculation, that that's all
Mm,
intercourse or sex is. Whereas if you expand the definition of pleasure, that it doesn't always have to include intercourse, it doesn't always have to
yeah.
be
Yeah.
penetration, it doesn't always have to be ejaculation, then you have this whole spectrum of these experiences that both a man can have or he can give his partner and all these things. So I think once all of those kind of false images of what sexuality and sex are put away, then they open this really wonderful space to explore their pleasure and really deepen their
Mm,
pleasure.
mm, yeah. So you're kind of switching the perspective and like at the same time opening up um, the conversation towards more exploration um, and more
Yeah.
experimenting. Um, and we as women, we with the menstruation, we are used to cycles in our hormones, but also in our libido. Um, and
Yeah.
I can imagine that for a man, as you described, it's like it's always been like this, and like for years, and it never changes. So that for men, I can imagine it can really be a challenge
Yeah.
to like change the perspective and say, okay, it there's not necessarily something wrong with me, but
Yeah.
there is something that's a situation that challenges me to approach myself, my body, my sexuality and also my partner maybe
Yeah.
differently. So
Yeah.
how can this look like, Samara?
Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely a mind shift. It's also around eliminating this conception, this idea that you have to perform during sex, which is I think much more stronger with men. It exists with women as well. I think women also
Mm,
feel pressure that they have to have a particular type of orgasm, or they
mm,
have to orgasm in general.
yeah.
And men also have the same type of idea that they have to be both they have to have a particular type of sexual performance, but they also have to make sure that the woman also has these massive multiple
Mm,
orgasms all the time and all these
mm,
things. So I think it
mm,
creates this very unhealthy pressure for men. So Bernie Zilberg in his book The New Male Sexuality, he talks about, and this is something that we do in our coaching as well, that men have to define what the conditions are that actually enable them to have these really deep sexual experiences. Again, going away from the definition of sex being just penetration, ejaculation, but just experiencing pleasure. And I think men have to be really open about themselves. I think when men start, really exploring themselves, they discover that they actually do need a very deep connection with another woman in order to experience
mm,
deep, profound sexual experiences. I mean, there's this kind of notion that women crave relationships, but men don't really need relationships to have,
mm,
sex, and that's actually not true. A lot of men actually they can perform sexually, obviously, but they don't get a lot of pleasure from just casual encounters with women that they don't have any connection with or they don't feel, particularly attracted with. So that's one thing. Men also have to recognize, that stress levels also have a profound effect on their sexuality, just as they do
mm.
for women. So,
Yes, of
they
course.
have to realize if they find that they need to be in a space where they feel relaxed, where they don't have any pressure from the outside, or they're not thinking about their work, then they should just create those conditions to enable them to have that type of sexual
Mm,
experience. And also, if they feel whatever it is. So I think the best way for men to do that is actually to think of instances where they had really good sex, something that they really felt was pleasurable for them, and try to
mm,
identify what were those factors within that actually help them to achieve that. It's like with women, they have to realize that as a whole man, they can actually have all these parts integrated. So you can
mhm,
be a loving husband and a loving parent and still be connected to your very primal sexual
mm,
energy, and
mm.
that you
Yes,
can be
please.
very primal, very, very rough, and very, yes, very kind of animalistic, and still be very sensitive and still be open to your heart.
Yeah,
And they'll
yeah.
actually realize that that's what women really like. That's a combination of both. Yeah,
Mm, yes, so good. So
yeah,
do you suggest doing this with meditations and like really probably also working
yeah,
with a coach, like really making himself clear that it's okay to be primal,
yeah,
it's okay to be like very strong and I don't know, primal, and at the
yeah.
same time very heart-centered and loving.
Yeah, yeah. So the simplest is kind of this meditation where you link the various parts and you allow them to have like a dialogue between each other.
Mm,
The brain, the heart, and the penis. But
mm,
also, yeah, through coaching you can work on, and even if you're interested in tantra, a lot of books about tantra explain a lot of these practices for men,
yeah.
where there's a lot of practices that involves how they move their pelvis, how they breathe into their pelvic area, and just doing that actually allows them to condition a lot of this kind of subconscious conditioning they have around their
Mm,
sexuality. So it's some of the practices involve, for instance, them thrusting or moving their pelvis, in the same way they do during sex, but also
mm,
doing it from a very conscious place, from a place where they're fully conscious and aware of what they're doing, and that helps
mm,
to connect these parts that are sometimes really,
mm,
really disconnected. Both the intellectual part and kind of the emotional part and the primal part, the sexual part, can all exist together
mm.
in a whole, and that makes it a fully integrated man. As we women, that's the same
Yes.
story that we have to do as well. Yeah, yeah,
Yes. So we touched upon some beautiful practices that we can do, um, um, men can do for to like really deepen their power. And it starts with a mind shift,
yes,
that sex can be so much more than just penetration, and sex
yes,
can also mean, and being a man can mean being in his heart and being in his power center and being in his sexual desire and lust, and every all of those things can exist at the same time,
Yes.
and you don't have to choose, right?
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes.
wow, it's
Exactly.
getting much more complex. Oh, sounds juicy. So
Yeah.
I
That's
do
the
love it.
that's the beauty of yeah, that's the beauty of human sexuality. It's just so it's such a very complex and beautiful I mean aspect of ourselves that isn't just around procreation, although that's the kind of, let's say, primary purpose of why it exists. But obviously, because of all of the emotions that we have around sexuality, it's obviously much more than that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be obsessing about it all the time if it was just around making babies. So
Yes, and there we also touching upon the topic that sexuality can also stay alive when you're older, like when you're as a woman
yeah,
40, 45, 50, uh, and
yes,
you're already moving through menopause, um, and what you talked about before, when men change and their sexuality or like their penis isn't behaving the way they are used to it, that this can be a change, right? And it does not need to
yeah,
be the end of
yes,
sexuality and sexual intimacy, but on the contrary, I would say it's just
yeah,
a development into something different.
yeah. Yeah, it's a time for, exploration of other erogenous zones of other things that stimulate us sexually, of sensuality as well. So it goes just beyond the classic definition of what sex has to be. So I think it's very important for men to understand that, as you guys say exactly, that it's not the end of something. If
Mm,
they see changes in their sexuality, obviously yes. If there's some underlining medical reason, yes, they should
yes.
research it if they think there's some medical kind of issues going on. But it's just the normal cycle of humanity, of your human existence, and they can still have very rich and very beautiful sexually active lives well into their 60s, 70s, as long as um, you exist basically, as long as you can function. So, and it's just about being open and exploring all of these things, yeah,
Yeah,
and getting rid of these misconceptions that we were talking about earlier.
yeah. And I
And I
guess
think, yeah, the most, yeah, go ahead, yeah,
taking the pressure out, right? It's not about
yeah,
performance.
yeah,
It's about
yeah,
pleasure and being in the moment and being with the partner, and
yeah,
connecting to the heart
exactly,
again, and like
yeah,
taking time. Mm.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it comes down to, if men want to understand what it is that women want in sex, I think the main one thing is presence. Women want,
Mm.
or any lover wants, someone who is fully present with them at that moment for anything that's coming up at that moment. So if
Yes.
you're in your mind thinking, oh, what does my penis look like? Am I
Mm.
doing these movements as I
Mm.
should? Or following this kind of script of what you think you should be looking like or doing. And that's the same thing that women also sometimes experience. Then you're not present in the moment and you're not really fully experiencing whatever it is that's coming up. So I think that's the number one thing. And once you become very present into that, and I think it's also, men shouldn't be afraid of being assertive about saying what it is that they desire and what it is that they want, but they
Mm.
should be open to a communication with their partner, so the partner can say whether or not she feels comfortable about doing something. If not uncomfortable, then what sex is actually a communication and a dialogue
Mm.
between two people to find those boundaries and those areas that they're willing to explore together, and to look into areas that they're not uncomfortable with, and
Mm.
why they're not uncomfortable,
Mm.
in the sense that she can also say what it is that she doesn't like or what she does like. Then that it gives her the permission to express herself more sexually,
Yeah.
and express her and kind of explore her desires as well,
Yeah.
which I think is the place where two partners actually want to be, where they're open and communicating with each other. So I guess the bottom line is for men to be both kind of understanding and receptive of what's happening with the partner. And obviously, I'm talking about heterosexual men because that's the men that I work with. on one side, but also on the other side, not to be afraid of their desires and to find ways
Mm.
in which they can communicate and discuss these desires with their
Beautiful, wonderful.
partner.
Yes, not only women can and should express the desires, men should do just the same.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, exactly.
absolutely.
Yes,
We are
yeah,
equal in every sense. Um,
yeah,
Beautiful. So, thank you, Samra, for this beautiful interview. And thank you for the practices that you shared in there. Um, if somebody of our listeners wants to work with you, how can they reach you and what do you offer?
yeah. So currently, I'm offering one-on-one coaching with men and women. So, but men in particular, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a website called alchemycoaching.org,
Mm-hmm.
and they can also follow me on Instagram. I think I'm called Alchemy by Samra or something like that. But they can find me under Alchemy Coaching. So it seemed like a good name at the time, so I went
Yes.
with it. So but yeah, so they can check me out there. They can sign up for my newsletter, and yeah, I'm always happy to talk to people about sex. It's one of the most fascinating things for me.
Isn't it?
It is.
Yes. And
Thank you so much for interviewing me, and sorry for all the technical glitches, but it happens. It will be good anyway.
they happen. Exactly. Life is happening here. Thank you so
Exactly.
much, Samra. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank
And
you.
it was
Thank
super
you.
valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye
Bye bye.
bye.